Some of the pollution Americans breathe doesn't start in America. It begins on the far side of the world, rises into the atmosphere, and crosses an entire ocean before anyone here inhales it. Yet few realize the air quality above the United States is shaped by decisions made thousands of miles away. To understand how that pollution reaches the U.S., we have to follow its path from the source. Air moves according to physics, not borders. 6 to 9 miles above the surface, a broad river of air, sometimes nearly 1,000 miles wide, races eastward at speeds that can reach 150 miles an hour, as fast as a bullet train. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory has tracked how industrial emissions from China ride this jet stream across the Pacific in just a few days. When a smokestack in China releases a plume, the emissions rise and enter this atmospheric highway. Once they reach that current, they don't stay over China. They're carried toward North America, and scientists can measure the fingerprints of that journey. The U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has documented the arrival of that current as it reaches the West Coast. It appears high above the surface, invisible to the eye, delivering a broad layer of pollution from across the ocean. It doesn't create dramatic smog events. Instead, it adds to the existing pollution, enough to shift the baseline Americans breathe every day. And that baseline matters. The danger isn't in what people can see, it's in what they can't. China's industrial engine runs on coal. According to Climate Trace, a nonprofit coalition that tracks global greenhouse gases, China burns more coal than the rest of the world combined. Its steel industry alone burns more coal than every U.S. power plant added together. Coal powers thousands of factories that produce metals, plastics, electronics, and chemicals for export. Burning coal releases pollutants including PM 2.5, fine particles small enough to reach deep into the lungs. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency warns that when inhaled, PM 2.5 can increase the risk of respiratory illness, and once the particles enter the bloodstream, increase the risks for heart disease and stroke. But PM 2.5 is only one part of the problem. Coal combustion also releases sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and carbon dioxide, gases that contribute to ozone formation when they mix with volatile organic compounds released from industrial processes. A Harvard University joint modeling study shows that these ozone-forming precursors can travel long distances, far from where they were emitted. Sunlight can drive photochemical reactions between nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds in the air, creating ground-level ozone, a reactive oxygen molecule that can damage lungs, trigger asthma attacks, and harm crops. Some pollutants behave even more unpredictably once they enter the atmosphere. Mercury is one of them. When coal burns, mercury vapor is released. The United Nations Global Mercury Assessment reports that this vapor can be transported across the Pacific, far from where it was released. Once mercury settles out of the air, the problem doesn't end. It changes form. It disperses into coastal waters and lakes in North American ecosystems and transforms into methylmercury. It enters the food chain quietly and steadily, concentrating as it moves up. It accumulates in fish at the top of the chain, binding tightly to proteins before they are caught and enter the food supply. When Americans eat too much contaminated seafood, mercury builds up in the bloodstream. It concentrates in the brain, impairing memory, coordination, vision, and fine motor skills. It's another example of how environmental costs move on their own, reaching the U.S. even when the manufacturing stays overseas. Pollution of this magnitude doesn't happen by accident. It happens because the system rewards it. China's manufacturing sector is built on low-cost energy, high output targets, and environmental enforcement that is secondary to industrial growth. The World Bank concluded that China's industrial boom was built on a simple reality. Factories could pollute without paying for the damage. There's one more pollutant that defines the scale of the problem: carbon dioxide. Unlike particulate matter or mercury, carbon dioxide doesn't settle out of the air. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports that carbon dioxide is a global gas, dispersing worldwide regardless of where it's emitted. Once it's released, it blends into the same atmosphere that warms the entire planet, adding to other greenhouse gases and increasing the threat of climate change. And the scale is enormous. Climate Trace estimates that China emits more than 17 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year. The United States emits about 7 billion. China's output is more than double. The carbon dioxide released in China contributes to the same global warming, an increase that affects American agriculture, wildfire seasons, hurricanes, and other weather extremes. This is a cost that crosses every border and never stops at the shoreline. The U.S. doesn't just import products, it imports part of the pollution created making those products. Not because consumers choose it, but because the global supply chain evolved through price competition, a system that hides environmental consequences from the people who purchase the goods. And the atmosphere is a place where those costs can't stay hidden. This affects Americans every day, and it's only the beginning of what this series will uncover. Now that we understand how pollution forms in China, how it travels, and how it reaches American air, the rest of the series becomes clearer. Each episode builds on the last, revealing how hidden costs stack layer by layer. Episode 2 will move from the air Americans breathe to the foods they eat. It will examine how heavy metals from industrial contamination in China, including lead in spices, cadmium in rice, and arsenic in baby food ingredients, enter the North American food supply. The investigation widens in Episode 3, turning to the chemicals inside low-cost plastics manufactured in China and the ways they reach Americans in everyday life. We'll look at phthalates, BPA substitutes, flame retardants, PFAS coatings, and the microplastics that shed from packaging. This series follows one simple idea. Pollutants don't respect borders, and neither do the toxic chemicals inside the products Americans import. Understanding how they form and travel to North America is the first step toward understanding their impact on millions of people.